Welcome back inside the den. It's been a minute since we've been back on the pod, but joining me today is Chris Murray and Mike Steffanson. We're going to be talking some Nevada basketball. Yes, the season ended and in quite, agonizing fashion for a lot of Wolfpack Nation. But that doesn't mean the tides of change aren't coming. We're going to talk about the roster and everything like that. But first and foremost, how are you guys doing today?
Oh, I'm doing great. We have nicknames now. So he's
Yes.
Mr. Charismatic and I'm Mr.
Charismatic.
Long Ball.
Yes.
And it did take us 2 months from the end of the season to do a podcast talking about the NCAA tournament game. It was really that painful.
We have been working in the meantime.
Yeah, we've been
doing
working,
some
but
things.
the plan was actually to do a live show right after that tournament game lost, but I think everyone was so shell-shocked that we weren't able to pull it off. You were at the game, so what was the vibe like as they
What do you
fritter
think
away
the vibe was
a
like?
17-point...
Well, there's a reason, I guess, after the fact didn't ESPN rank the worst losses of the tournament, and sure enough, Nevada's number one at the top of the list, and it felt that way. I was there with Alex Margulies and Shannon Kelly, and we had a if Nevada wins contingency plan for our post-game coverage and what the rest of the day and the next day were going to look like. Of course, they were going to stay and play again. And then we had a Nevada loses contingency plan. And basically, right when we said, all right, we're all in on the Nevada wins plan, that was when all you-know-what broke loose. 17-point lead evaporates in a hurry. And so, yeah, it was... I mean, obviously, we're objective journalists, but we also like to cover winners, and we wanted to stay in Salt Lake for another day. And we were traveling with the team, actually, which was a cool experience. But really, we looked back on it, and the start of that trip was when Joe Biden was in town. Mm-hmm. And we were on the tarmac for so long because it was like conflict of when he was arriving, and they needed to keep everything clear. And we looked back, and we went, man, this is when that trip went sour, when we couldn't take off because of Joe. And no political innuendos here at all. But, yeah, we were like, all right, got off to a rough start, and sure enough, they take the loss. But yeah, it was really tough to leave. And we actually, because we traveled with them, we had to pack our clothes up before the game in case we had to leave right after. And to me, that just felt so wrong. I had all these clothes hanging up like, we're going to be here through the weekend. And then you got to put them away. And sure enough, we did have to wheel them out immediately after that game. But, I mean, what can you say? They had it in the bag until they didn't. And you do got to credit Dayton for rallying to win that game and move on.
I was here with Chris watching, and I'd say around that 9-8 minute mark in the second half, before the real run started, Chris he was about to tweet saying, "Oh, that's a wrap. That should do it."
Sharpie.
And then record scratch. It didn't go that way. But I find it funny that they're on the opposite end of that loss when Nevada's done that twice to Texas and Cincinnati. So you got to be humbled if you're part of Wolfpack Nation. You got to see both sides of the coin, so to speak. But now let's get into the offseason. Steve Alford has been busy. Obviously, Nevada lost two of its the best players, let's just say it, in Jared Lucas and Keenan Blackshear. The duo combined to average 32 points per game last season. That's a lot of offensive output. And obviously, their senior leadership can't be understated. But let's just go through the additions in the offseason. There's a busy transfer window, obviously, but the additions of let's just say Kobe Sanders and Xavier Dussel, that they stand to potentially replace Lucas and Blackshear. Chris, give us your breakdown of this guy.
Well, I think the biggest thing was the retention. We talk about the transfer portal and who you can add. I think the biggest thing is not losing your best players. Nevada does return its top 4 scorers from last year with remaining eligibility. Nick Davidson, he's one of 5 all-conference players coming back in the entire conference. Trey Coleman, 2-time All-Mountain West defensive team. Tyler Rollison, KJ Himes. So I think that's the really big positive to start. And then you look at the 5 players they added. Yeah, Kobe Sanders is probably the most intriguing to me because this guy almost averaged 20 points per game last year. Now, was it with a Big West team that went 0-20 in conference? So the question is, can he be productive within a winning ecosystem and a winning atmosphere? But a 6'8" guy who has ball handling skills, he can play point guard. He's a pretty good shooter. Obviously has great size. He's good in the pick and roll. There's a lot to like about his game. It's kind of like the next Keenan Blackshear. He's maybe not a traditional point guard, but can play that role and will have a huge size advantage. And then Xavier Dussel is one of the top 5 shooters who was in the portal. So he actually made more three-pointers than Jared Lucas last year at a higher percentage. Now, he doesn't do all the other stuff. He doesn't get to the free throw line as well. Some of the defensive metrics aren't quite as impressive as maybe you would like. But those are 2 really good players. And if that's your starting backcourt, I think it's a really good starting point. And, yeah, losing 2 outstanding players, I think they added 2 outstanding players.
That's the thing, enormous shoes to fill. And we could have been having a much different conversation on the guys that they were able to bring in. But on paper, it's 2 guys that you feel like could fill those shoes out pretty well. It remains to be seen. And I don't think it's going going to happen in game number 1, especially with Kobe, like you said. Maybe hasn't played the most meaningful basketball, so we know he's got stats and he can score, and he's got, as far as his measurables, those seem to be impressive. But put him in some higher stakes environments, and frankly, the Mountain West is such a gauntlet, and it should be again next year. He's gonna have to really play well to be worth the move. And of course, I'm sure there's some NIL, a pot that was thrown at his way, if you will, and that's a whole nother conversation of where Nevada lies in NIL and how that was. It helped them to retain guys like Nick and Trey Coleman, and Daniel Foster's coming back. But maybe they could have got some bigger fish if that NIL pot was a little bigger and compared to some other Mountain West schools. But you've highlighted this at NevadaSportsNet.com. Overall, it was really a good offseason in terms of additions and / departures for Nevada. It could have been a lot worse, this conversation.
No, I think so, because, you look at Dussel. This guy's been in the Mountain West for 4 years. He's been on an NCAA tournament team out of the Mountain West, Wyoming. So, I think he's a pretty proven entity. I think just the fact they didn't lose any key players. Jazz Gardner, I think fans wanted to see how he would develop, but he wasn't a key player last year. Tylen Pope wasn't a key player last year. Tyler Powell didn't play last year. So being able to retain that core is not something that a lot of Mountain West schools did. 8 of the 11 Mountain West schools lost at least one starter who averaged at least 9 points per game. Nevada did not have a big loss like that, and now they've added 5 players that are very interesting and very intriguing. So if you want to say winners and losers from Mountain West portal season, Nevada is certainly in the winners column. And that's a very small list. I actually did do this on our website. Nevada and Colorado State are the only ones I put in the winners column. So it's been a very good offseason for Steve Alford and his team.
Yeah, certainly. There's a lot to replace, obviously, with Jared Lucas and Keenan Blackshear. But with the addition of Kobe, I could foresee Mike Stefannson next year during highlight packages saying, Kobe.
Yeah. R.I.P.
The
Mamba,
return.
Big Kobe guy. And you come in with a name like Kobe, you better be getting some buckets. That's the hope, at least.
That is the hope. But it's interesting in terms of roster construction that, and this is obviously a projection that Kobe will be the point guard. Certainly Tyler Rollison could take that mantle. But just with his size at 6'8", Keenan Blackshear's size at 6'6", I think Steve Alford has a type here. Maybe he likes he ends up liking the bigger point guards just because of the potential mismatch that goes with it. Do you think that, because obviously if you go back to his first years at Nevada, he had Grant Sherfield, who was a smaller point guard, but, a great facilitator of the ball. But do you think this is a trend for Alford and getting the bigger point guards?
Well, he's had them before. Kyle Anderson at UCLA was a very successful point guard for him, too. So I think he knows how to use them, and he probably appreciates having a bigger point guard and what that means to the team. You look at Nevada's potential starting lineup. We don't know what it's going to be, but if it is Kobe Sanders and then Xavier Dussel and then Trey Coleman, Nick Davidson, and KJ Himes, that's 6'8", 6'4", 6'7", 6'9", 6'10". That's a really, really big team. And you think back to those Musselman teams, they were really, really big across the board as well. They had a 6'7" point guard and Cody Martin. So I think there's a huge advantage defensively when you have that size because you can switch on pick and rolls. You can be a lot more versatile on offense. You could post up guys against defenses that they don't usually. The point guard's not usually in the post playing defense. So we'll see exactly how it plays out. There are really 2 legitimate options for point guard. It's Tyler Rollison and it's Kobe Sanders. I think Daniel Foster can play that a little bit, but that's not going to be his role. Yeah. So those 2 guys are going to split duties, and they'll play together quite a bit, I would imagine. I think Tyler Rollison is due for a little step up in role as well.
That's what I was actually going to say. You saw him on the floor with Keenan a lot of times this past season, and I felt like they played well, getting Keenan off the ball. I could see Kobe also going off ball when Tyler comes in, if they're in together. And, Tyler, I like his confidence as a freshman. I felt like he got better throughout the season, and there's probably a bit of a wall that you hit in your first collegiate season. I had a chance to talk with KJ Himes, who I did a little feature story with throughout the season about his little comeback more of a big comeback from a bad back injury. And so I've got a little bit of rapport with him, and I just kind of brought up Tyler. I'm like, I kind of like him. He got a little dog in him, not knowing him well. And KJ's like, yeah, that kid has no fear. Actually, it might have been a conversation with Nick Davidson now that I think about it. But anyway, when I was hanging out with them at the Humane Society. But yeah, you could tell they got a lot of respect for Tyler and kind of the attitude he has. And so, yeah, probably going to be coming off the bench, but you can bet he's going to be going at the new guys and saying, hey, I've been here for a year already. Like, I know what's expected, and I'm going to try to show out and at least make it a battle for that starting role. But no reason to believe Kobe won't be that guy given what he was probably promised when he came over from Cal Poly and what is on paper with him, and frankly in video too, of what he's capable of. So.
When I look at Tyler, I think like Jalen House is a nice comp, like a smaller guy who can be a pest on defense, who doesn't, like you say, have any confidence issues at all. He wants to take the shots. I think he is a little bit more of a facilitator than Kobe Sanders, or if you look back at Keenan Blackshear, so maybe a little bit more traditional point guard. But there was a lot to like from his freshman season, and he's going to get better this year.
Yeah.
I mean, you always get better in your second year now that you know exactly what it was like and where you have to improve. So I think the backcourt, which was a question, losing Jared Lucas and Keenan Blackshear, is in a pretty solid spot heading into next season.
Oh, and we also talked about, there was a chance that Nick maybe would have looked elsewhere. I think Trey Coleman was pretty locked in to stay, but shoot, we don't really bring up Tyler. Like, he might have been able to look elsewhere. He's a California kid, and he did pretty well as a freshman, but he seems to be locked in and motivated to make a name for himself.
It's kind of like the first guy at point guard from the prep ranks that have actually worked out well for Nevada. It's been a while. Like, they've had guys that they've tried, whether it was Jalen Weaver, or whether it was, Kane Milling, who, kind of was more of a shooting guard, Jelani Clark. They had brought in a number of guys that had kind of been like the high school point guard that were going to develop, and it never seemed like it actually clicked and worked. Trey Pettigrew just the year before. With this one, it seems like, he's a guy who's going to be here for a while and develop, barring NIL offers down the road. But he seems like the first guy that's really stuck in that role, and you can envision a nice future for him. Like, he's a really good player.
That made me think, going back now, I'm like, who's the last high school point guard? I'm thinking about Deontay Burton.
Yeah.
That really panned out. Lindsey Drew was a transfer, correct?
No, he was a legit high school guy.
Okay, so I'll give Lindsey Drew.
But I mean, that's always a very important position. Like, everybody wants to have the ball in their hands. So it's very easy to go to the portal and find the guy who's going to have the ball in his hands. And if you keep doing that, it's hard to develop that next point guard from the high school ranks. Everything kind of has to line up. Like with Lindsey, the team was kind of decimated, and Musk came in and kind of just gave him that job as a freshman. So he had 4 years of doing that. Same thing with Deontay. Like, David Carter steps in, the team was decimated. He put the ball in his hands from his freshman year, and he, has 4 years to grow. That's not necessarily what Tyler's role has been. Because last year he was that backup guy. It was really nice to see with him stick with the program, and we'll see exactly how much his role expands this year.
Yeah, we talk about development, and you look at, instead of the backcourt, the front court, just with your Trey Colemans, your Nick Davidsons, your KJ Himes, who seems like he's been here since the Stone Age, is a real Van Wilder of Nevada, so to speak. I mean that. We were not far removed from graduating college, right? Or high school ourselves.
Man's
when he
closer
started.
to 30 than he is to 20 at this point.
But he's they're making money though. He's sticking around. That's good. But I digress. Back to the point. The front court. It's a lot of players, veteran presence. Projected starters obviously are Trey Coleman, Nick Davidson, and KJ Himes. Some of the depth behind them is interesting. Especially with the center. They got the transfer from Texas State, Brandon Love, 6'9" guy, undersized for a center, but as you wrote in your article, Chris, he has some up.
No, I really like Brandon Love. I think he's a good addition. He really blossomed as a junior. So 1 year at Nevada, I think he's got athleticism. He's got shot blocking. He's not really going to give you much offense outside of the paint, and it's all left-handed. He's a left-handed guy. He almost always goes to his left and finishes with his left. So if they can get him a little bit more comfortable with his right, maybe there's more offense there, but he's not taking mid-ranges. He's not taking three-pointers. He's not the greatest free throw shooter, but around the rim, he's a very talented player. I'd not be surprised at some point if he's starting for Nevada in the post. I think KJ Himes kind of deserves that to start the season, given that he's been here for 7 years, and I think he's a really strong defensive player. But I like the Brandon Love addition. I think he's a really talented player. I think he adds a little bit more physicality and a little bit more athleticism in the post than what they had last year. So I think that's a guy who, among all of the transfers, it's really the top three for me: Brandon Love, Xavier Dussel, Kobe Sanders. I think all those guys can start for this team, and I think all of them can be fairly high impact players.
Well, and you gave Brandon the Dario Hunt comparison at NevadaSportsNet.com, and Dario happens to be one of my good friends coming out of college, still Nevada's all-time leader in blocked shots. Not the strongest free throw shooter. I think it was a very solid comp, and Dario Hunt was a heck of a player for Nevada. And he, like you said, really, really strong around the paint, obviously can block a lot of shots, and that's something Nevada's going to need. And, yes, that front court battle between KJ and Brandon will be a lot of fun to watch. Again, having spent some time with KJ this season and just kind of knowing what he is coming back from in his back injury, this was not a 100% season for him. And I think that was the plan going into it, was like, all right, let's work you back. You will be the starter. He wasn't playing like starter minutes though, and there was foul trouble a lot of times, and so I expect another offseason for KJ to really up his strength again. And I mean, he basically had to rebuild his left leg after losing all his muscle after a really debilitating back injury. So I'm inclined to think KJ is going to take another step up this year, but also Brandon comes in with some pedigree, and so I think that obviously competition only makes them stronger, and so I'm excited to watch that unfold.
Certainly, it should be interesting to watch. Obviously, we're many months away from the season, but Chris, you wrote about the strengths and weaknesses of this current team and how it's situated right now. Quickly go through, like 3 strengths, 3 weaknesses of this roster year over year compared to the one we just saw.
Well, I think experience is a strength. You look at my projected starting lineup, you're talking about a 7th-year player, you're talking about 3 5th-year players, and a 4th-year player. That's got to be one of the oldest starting lineups in all of the nation, if that's what it ends up being. It's a very old team, and then they've got 3 guys coming off the bench who are in their 4th or 5th year of college as well. So this is a very veteran group of guys. So you always want old teams. I think Nevada has an old team, so that's a strength. Strength number 2 would be depth. I think this team legitimately goes 7-8 deep. And you look at the Mountain West, it always seems like teams kind of have 5, and then after that, it's not very good. And I think Nevada had pretty good depth last year. You saw that thin out when Hunter McIntosh wasn't able to play in the NCAA tournament. I think this team could have 7 or 8 guys who, if you put them in there, like they're at least average, maybe above average Mountain West players. And I think that's a pretty big luxury that a lot of Mountain West schools don't have. So I think that's a big one. And I would also say shooting. I actually think shooting on this team could be very, very strong. Xavier Dussel is a big part of that. If you look at all the returning players and their three-point shooting last year, right around 36% as a team. So that's a pretty good number. Maybe you want it a little bit higher, 37, 38%. But I think Nick Davidson could improve there. He was at 29% last year. So I think those are your probably 3 biggest strengths. Does anything else kind of stand out to you?
No, I mean, I'm aligned with you, and you're, kind of much more in tune with the team than I am at this point in the offseason. But, again, going back to what they lost and the enormous shoes that were to fill, they really did a good job of, at least on paper, filling those shoes. And now we have to see if it pans out. But this is another team, given the expectations that the team had last year, there's no reason to kind of not keep those same expectations. And I think there could have been a scenario where it didn't work out as well in the offseason, and maybe we had to tame those expectations a little bit. Now, is this an NCAA tournament team? We'll have to see. Those strengths you just outlined can make them capable of doing that. But I guess if I were to point out a weakness is, a lot of these guys haven't played together. So the summer is going to be huge for them.
Yeah.
Xavier having all that Mountain West experience and knowing the league, I think will be huge. And I can imagine that he's really motivated to finish his career strong, especially over here at Nevada. But yeah, it's hopefully they get enough time and enough reps together where they can all mold well together. And I think we saw Jared and Keenan coexist well at times, but maybe not coexist as well at times. And so as long as they can kind of go get on the same page, I guess. But that's a lot of unknown given today's state of college athletics and the college-aged kid, if you will.
And if I had
said they're all old.
Yeah, if I had to do 3 weaknesses, one of them would be they don't necessarily have that proven star power. I think Nick Davidson's going to be that guy. But last year, every defense was we got to stop Jared Lucas, we got to stop Keenan Blackshear. And that makes scoring, if you're Nick Davidson or Trey Coleman as the 3rd or 4th option, a lot easier. Because they're not devising defenses to slow you down. So with those 2 guys gone, and your expectation is maybe Kobe Sanders, Nick Davidson, Trey Coleman are your top 3 scorers, how do they adjust to that pressure and that defensive game plan? Teams are going to try and figure out how do we stop Nick Davidson, make him inefficient every single game. Can he overcome that and still be an all-conference first-team kind of player? So I think that's probably the first one. Weakness number 2, I would say, I don't know that defense is a weakness, but last year's defense was really good. It was the second-best defense in the last 15 years of Nevada men's basketball if you look at Ken Pom. And that not only do they lose a very good defensive player in Keenan Blackshear, they also lose Corey Barnett, assistant coach, who coordinated their defense the last 2 years. And you look at the 5 transfers they brought in, 4 of those 5 have a negative box score plus minus on the defensive side. The only one is in the plus, Brandon Love. So they didn't go out and get guys who have been parts of really good defenses in the past. So I think they're going to slip there. Now, if they slip down to 75, it's not the end of the world. If they slip down to sub 100, then it's pretty problematic if you're trying to win a Mountain West championship. Usually you need a top 50 Ken Pom defense. And if I had to say the third one, the front court free throw shooting is very poor. KJ Heim struggles from the free throw line. Brandon Love struggles from the free throw line. Justin McBride, a guy they brought in from Oklahoma State, struggles from the free throw line. Jariah Coleman struggles from the free throw line. Nick Davidson is the only power forward / center who shoots above 55% from the free throw line. Wolfpack fans, probably all basketball fans, hate nothing more than missed free throws. the backcourt is a really good free throw shooting team, but that front court free throw shooting, I think, has to be a focus.
And that was such a luxury for them last season.
Yeah.
I mean, they won games at the free throw line, and so no reason to believe that won't at least hopefully be the MO for them this year, but they got to sink those things. So I can imagine a lot of reps inside the Sessions facility.
Yeah, we'll see. I mean, I think they take a step back and their ability to get to the line. Obviously, Jared Lucas, having him on the roster helps a lot. I'm not calling him a flopper, just he knew how to drew fouls. But regardless, yeah, it's going to be a different offense completely. I mean, last year it was so ball dominant, like between Keenan and Jared. Mm-hmm. They were literally like just setting, backdoor screens for Jared, or just, picks to get him open. Like they were running around like at times like Steph Curry just to get him looks. I think there was a stretch throughout the season when Keenan was down, and it was like when Hunter was like stepping up, when they were really starting to move the ball around and get good shots, and they had some really good offensive outputs. And I think, given Alford's background and going through the Coach Knight tree, that's the offense that they ideally want, where people are moving, you're distributing it, and I kind of foresee that next year, because it's going to be an offense where things are shared. You're not going to have that guy that's going to be so ball dominant like Nick Davidson. Sure, but he doesn't screen to me like a King Blackshear or Jared Lucas.
Right.
I think he's very team first, and probably will end up being a lot more of a facilitator in the post and end up passing more. So
you don't have to score though.
What would be like the over under points per game for Nick Davidson? He was, I think, 12.9 this year.
Yeah.
Like, is it 18? Like, can he take that next step to being the guy, like a player of the year candidate? I think he's like a really consistent 3-point shot away from being Tyson Degenhart. But you look at Tyson Degenhart with Boise State, like he doesn't go out there and just, I'm going to put up 20 every game either. Mm-hmm. It's more of like a shared approach.
It comes like kind of organically.
You could see that this year, but I that would be interesting. If I set like the over-under for Nick Davidson points at 18, would you take over or under? I think that's roughly where it will probably be.
It seems like a fair number.
Yeah.
I'm like, my gut tells me just slightly under. I hate to say it, because I could see some clunkers here and there that drive that average down. But he's going to need to be above, I think, if Nevada is going to want to get to the Mountain West Championship game or win a regular season title. He's got to really take a next step, and I think he's well aware of that. And, I mean, what a dog he was to play, the back half of the Mountain West schedule with a torn labrum. I mean, this guy really puts on for the silver and blue. And so, he was the guy that was probably the most distraught in that post-game locker room in Salt Lake City, and he was really awesome talking with us. I mean, it was not awesome doing that and enduring him, crying quite literally. But I really appreciated that he was willing to talk about it all and be open about it. And so I can imagine that fire is still brewing a little bit. There was some reports that he had received some, death threats quite literally, and I hate to hear that. And so the fact that he's coming back, I'm encouraged by that, and hopefully he's motivated as can be. I would imagine he is.
And I hope those death threats were from bettors. Well, I hope there are no death threats.
No local.
But I don't think the Wolfpack fans had any hate toward Nick Davidson. Obviously, a couple of those last possessions against Dayton didn't go his way. Yeah. But that's going to kind of be his role moving forward. Like when the game is on the line, the ball is going to go to him. Yep. When Nevada's got 3 bad offensive possessions, the ball is going to go to him. That used to be Keenan Blackshear. That used to be Jared Lucas. And that's the next step for him. That's the ascension. And that's what's required for Nevada to go and win a regular season championship. Like, Nick Davidson has to be a first-team All-Mountain West player. And it's certainly in there. Like, you saw at times last year he was the best player on the court when they went to Utah State, and he outplayed the player of the year, great Ospor. He's got – it's just every single game is the expectation once you get to that stage of your career, and I think it'll be fun to see him take on that challenge.
Well, and going back really quick, Jared, to how big of a decoy or how big of an emphasis was put on Keenan and Jared, and that helped others, flourish. Who's going to be that guy this year that is on the scouting report? And I mean, Jared, he didn't shoot super well at the start of the year, but Coach Alford kept saying he makes impacts without scoring because of just how much attention he draws and how much he moves and drawing fouls and being a pest at times on defense too. I think he was sort of an underrated defender at times. So is there going to be a guy on this team? Is it going to be Xavier Dussel that is going to be that guy that draws all the attention and can maybe open some things up for some other guys? Obviously remains to be seen, but they're going to need a guy that is that primary defensive target on the other side that can maybe open things up for the rest of the guys.
Certainly. And folks, no death threats towards Nevada players. That's ridiculous. Yeah. I mean, it's an NCAA tournament appearance. That's that's towards the ceiling of what you expect from Nevada basketball. A Sweet 16 run. That's once every 2 generations. That's as rare as they come. I get it if you're cheering on Kentucky. I'm just like, yeah, be
You
pissed.
expect it.
Be pissed. You expect to be in the championship. It's like, this is Nevada. Like, just making the tournament is accomplishment enough. And that's what you were talking to Nick Fazekas the other day, and he was like, yeah, that's what you want. That's if you're a fan, just make
Okay,
the
so
tournament.
Jared says okay for death threats for Kentucky players, but not for
I was wondering
Nevada
if
players.
that's kind of what he was saying.
Okay, so Lamont Butler, who was at San Diego State, now at Kentucky.
I'd say the degree of fandom's differently. Like, it's different, and being a fan is absurd. Is absurd.
Yeah.
As an Eagle fan, you get crazy sometimes.
You never said a death threat to Donovan McNabb or Terrell Owens?
No, I see. I was too young. Yeah, it was like 2002,
Freddie Mitchell?
2003. We weren't rolling with that. It was
No.
like post 9/11 America. You can't do that.
Yeah, it's
You
silly.
should still be able to, and and I mean, frankly, it was Nick's dad via Twitter who said, "My boy received death threats," and so that just makes it even worse that a parent of somebody is relaying that information to the world. And as parents, I mean, we can't imagine our kids facing something like that, and now he's expected to come back and want to perform well for the school, whether it was someone affiliated with the school or not that issued those death threats. I think the betting angle makes a lot of sense, because anybody who supported Nevada thought they were going to the window until there was 7 minutes to go, or really, frankly, less than 3 minutes ago or whatever, and things went real sour. But anyways, we can move off of that topic. Either way, it's at the end of the day, it's freaking sports, guys. Like, this ain't life or death situations here.
Yeah.
It's
Just sports, guys.
Yeah.
Just sports. We'll take a quick break. We'll be back to wrap this up after this. We're back inside the den. Just got done talking about death threats, but let's move on to some happier things. Roster construction of Nevada basketball. Chris, put your GM hat on. There's no GMs in college basketball, but if there was,
He is a commissioner of a
pointing-
fantasy baseball
I
league.
am.
Yes.
Put on my commissioner hat.
How would you go about in a college basketball offseason? How would you go about constructing a roster? The current trends are a lot of transfer players, and obviously NIL buckets. That plays a huge role. Don't get me wrong. But if I give you unlimited resources, how would you go about it? Would you try to zig when everyone else is zagging? Just give me what you would do if you're in Alford's shoes.
I mean, I think it's like 50-50 transfers high school players. So you got 13 scholarships, so about 6 and 6. And I think that's the one that makes the most sense. I think you can't ignore high school players. I think you have to recruit high school players so when they do enter the portal, maybe you have that relationship and you can go and get them after the fact. That's how it happened with Will Baker. That's how it happened with Grant Sherfield. So that would be kind of how I would do it. When you look at transfers in themselves, Nevada's best transfers have been power conference players who maybe just didn't get an opportunity there. Caleb Martin, Cody Martin, Oleg Chiz, Malik Story, Joey Shaw, Kendall Stevens, Grant Sherfield.
Jazz had done some good stuff at Portland.
Yeah, so there are some guys who, kind of come up. Des Cambridge was at Brown. You look at Jazz, he was at Portland. You look at Jared Lucas, he's another power conference transfer guy, but Keenan Blackshear came from FAU, which is a lower conference. So I think Nevada's most success has been with those high major guys. It's just kind of hard to get those guys in the NIL world now. Like, let's say an average starter at a Mountain West school for the higher NIL programs is $100,000. Well, an average starter for a power conference school is probably $250,000, $300,000. So, you got to spend your money wisely. Technically, they cannot offer money, but, we know how it's done. There are, inducements and, incentives to come and play for Nevada from an NIL perspective. And, you look at this year's class in particular, only one of these guys does come from a power conference level. That's Justin McBride, a reserve big from Oklahoma State. The rest of them, you got Evansville, Cal Poly, Fresno State, and Texas State. So I think some of that has to do with the financial aspect of it. But you look at the history, if you rank Nevada's top 10 transfers over the last 15 years, I would say like 7 or 8 of them did come from power conference schools, and they played a little bit, but they didn't play a ton.
Yeah.
So I think those are probably the guys I would target.
Yeah, hard to disagree with that, frankly. And I know Steve Alford, he's kind of had to adjust to the times, right? Because he's a big development guy, and so he loves to go after the high school players. But if you're recruiting all high school kids, you're not going to compete. You're not going to be keeping up with the Joneses, which is the world we're in and nowadays. But yeah, the NIL wrinkle is really, and frankly, he said it at Media Days last year, it's pay for play. It's not what they wanted it to be or what they planned for it to be, but it's pay for play, and that's the current system. I think eventually it's going to be like a contract thing. Like there's going to be penalties if you leave, as opposed to just being able to free for all it. But yeah, I mean, I'm pretty much aligned with you there. I think like a half and half split is still really healthy, because you want to have guys that are brought up, and like you said, whether you recruit them and they don't come, and then down the pipe, it's kind of a weird dynamic though. It's like, if I don't get you now, maybe I can get you later.
Yeah.
You're always got to be looking ahead, which is tough. You know, like you always want to be present, right? But then you always got to be thinking of what's coming down the pipe. And so, yeah, I don't really have much more to add on that GM angle outside of, like, you have to be in that transfer portal.
But if you don't recruit high school kids, you don't get Nick Davidson, you don't get Trey Coleman, you don't get Daniel Foster. Like, these are important players to have in your program.
Yeah.
And more so than ever, you're not going to come to full fruition with them because they're not going to be patient enough to wait it out. But some kids will be patient enough to wait it out. Yeah, sometimes it is Darian Williams, and you only get one great year, and then you lose him to Texas Tech because they can pay him more money. You know, that's just part of the breaks. It's basically like a junior college now, where your roster is rebuilt every single year. You can't say, okay, 3 years from now, these high school guys were going to come in. They're really going to blossom then because they're not going to wait to blossom. They all want to play right now. So it's difficult, but it's the way of the world. And it did take a couple of years for Steve Alford to adjust. There were a couple of rough years in there. COVID obviously was a portion as well, but it seems like they found a footing. I think in NIL, we obviously don't have the numbers because you can't get them through public records requests, but I would guess pretty strongly Nevada's in the top 3 in the Mountain West in NIL money, and that's a good place to be. And I think that's part of the reason they were able to have some cohesion and retention this offseason.
Yeah, they're certainly in a good spot going into next season, among the top in the Mountain West. We'll see how everything develops, but yeah, like you said, the current state of college basketball feels like for the mid-majors and everything below is like it's like a feeder system, man. It's like the Oakland Athletics to the MLB, right? It's just like, yeah, you're starting to become a star out here, but yeah, soon enough you'll be making some good money playing for the Texas Techs, the Kentuckys, and the big schools of the world, and that's the world that Steve Alford and the rest of the Mountain West had to make comfort in, and like our friend Billy Bean said, adapt or die. So that'll be the kind of the motto for mid majors from here on out for college basketball.
Or retire, which we're seeing a lot of coaches do that because they just don't want to deal with the wild, wild west, if you will.
Yeah,
I'm all for players getting compensated now. Don't get me wrong there, but there's going to need to be some more structure going forward if we don't want this to get too out of hand, at least in my opinion.
Yeah, certainly. Obviously, we're very far out from the season, but Chris, you always stress the importance of the out of conference schedule. Just if you make a wish list, do they need to strengthen the out of conference schedule next year to further pad their potential resumes for the tournament? Because obviously we don't know if the Mountain West will continue to get respect from here on out.
Well, I think so. I think the non-conference has to be as strong as they can make it. Now, there's obviously difficulties in doing that. Power conference schools don't want to play, certainly on the road against mid-majors, but they don't really want to play mid-majors at all. But you look at last year, everyone thought Nevada would be a 7 seed easily in. They were a 10 seed. They were 1 seed away from having to play in a first 4 game. And that's after going 13-5 in a 6-bid Mountain West. And that was because the non-conference schedule wasn't that great. Now, they did beat Washington. They did beat TCU, both away from home. So I don't think you can bank on, getting respect from the selection committee. And beyond that, it's not about just getting in the tournament anymore. It's about getting a seed to set you up for success. San Diego State made it to the Sweet 16 last year, not because it was the best team in the Mountain West, because it had the best seed in the Mountain West, because it went out and played a really good non-conference schedule, and it also has respect for making it to a national title game the previous years. So, we don't have the full schedule. We know Washington's coming to Nevada. We know they're supposed to be in an ESPN Invitational in Orlando that usually has a pretty good field. But I think the roster's strong enough that you could have a top 75 non-conference schedule, and you're not going to overwhelm this team. Now, there are some cohesion and learning how to play together things that's going to have to happen in non-conference. But, I think Nevada does need to schedule as hard as possible. And that's not an easy process. It costs a lot of money. You have to have a lot of good relationships. But the goal this year should be getting back to the NCAA tournament. If you make it to the NIT, it's not the end of the world given the players you lost. But the only way you can 100% give yourself the best situation to get back to an NCAA tournament is to schedule well in non-conference. Because as much as you hope the Mountain West doesn't take a step back, the goal or the thought process shouldn't be, well, we're going to get a lot of quad 1 and quad 2 opportunities in the Mountain West. That's the hope, but the Mountain West has taken some pretty big hits this year in terms of losing players in the portal, so I think it's going to be a little bit of a step back for the conference.
Anyway, it was such a banner year last year. It's hard to say that that's going to happen again. It's certainly a stronger conference than it was, even 5 years ago in terms of for the future. But yeah, I'm right there with you, man. Like, you got to play some dogs in the non-conference, and Nevada got a little taste of it, but really, as we learned from the selection committee, and really the Mountain West not doing that well again at the NCAA tournament, you can't expect that Selection Sunday to be in your favor no matter how good the Mountain West Conference is until you win some games in the NCAA tournament. And so suddenly we're talking about 2 seasons from now, maybe some more respect for the conference. But, yeah, non-conference is going to be enormous for this team. And, yeah, I'm right there with you. If they end up in the NIT, they'd probably be a pretty good seed in the NIT, and maybe you make a run in that tournament. And I wouldn't be frowning upon that if I was a Wolfpack fan either. But at the end of the day, the last 3 NCAA tournaments for Nevada have been pretty sour, and so I know Wolfpack fans are really itching for another NCAA tournament win since it has been a little bit.
Very true. All right, we're going to wrap it up here. Just last question, guys. Summer's quickly coming up. Obviously, we have Memorial Day coming. What are you looking forward to most this summer? We have a lot of activities, obviously, with NSN, rodeo, ACC, you got the Barracuda Championship. I'll start with you, Mike. What are you looking forward to most?
The weather.
Yeah.
The Eddy. My days off.
The Eddy.
No, I'm just kidding. Well, obviously, Big Blue, Lake Tahoe is always a treat, and I'm a huge rodeo guy. Having started my career in Montana, I love the sport now, and I know a lot of the cowboys and cowgirls that are involved. So rodeo is always a really fun week for me. They have booze in the media tent, so I always appreciate that. Man, I sound like an alcoholic, though. I promise I'm not. But ACC's at the top of the list. It's the coolest thing we get to do every year, and I feel like, we do a lot of work throughout the season covering teams, which is always fun. We're doing sports. At the end of the day, it's always a really good time. But I feel like the ACC is always like our Super Bowl, right? It's like our little end of the season retreat and party, and everybody gets up to Tahoe, and we cover the heck out of the ACC. Gonna jump in the lake and just have some fun. And so I'm really looking forward to the ACC and getting up there with you guys and getting Chris back because he had COVID last year.
I had COVID last year. I was able to go up Sunday. I did see Steph Curry's 18-foot eagle putt from really far away. Wasn't close to anyone. I'd been cleared. Mine, I just want to go on vacation with my family. So I've got a trip to Cancun and all-inclusive in June. And then
we're coming on that one?
yes. Oh, okay. And then just me and my wife going to Bottle Rock in Napa at the end of this month. Pearl Jam will be playing there, so we got tickets for all 3 days. But in terms of work stuff, there's a hope that maybe we can do a behind-the-scenes documentary show about Nevada football's training camp entering the season, first year under Jeff Choate. I think he's a really interesting guy. I think he's a really energetic guy. I think he's a guy who Wolfpack fans will probably fall in love with for his personality. Obviously, he's got to put a good product on the field as well. So if that does come to fruition and we can kind of tell some of the behind-the-scenes stories about Nevada football's next era and generation, I think that would be cool as well.
It's a great
Absolutely.
call. I mean, the football team wants us to be talking about them like we're talking about the basketball team, right? Like competing for championships year in and year out, and a lot of high stakes and pressure on that team. And so Jeff Choate I think he's ready for that pressure.
Yeah, for sure.
We'll have to see. I also love my family too, by the way. We're going on a road trip in a couple weeks, so I'm really excited for that.
I mentioned Siga, and I mentioned the wife.
I love my girls. I get a lot of good quality time with them. I'm looking forward to more QT throughout the summer, and of course, Wild Island. I was a proud Wild Island employee from age 14 to 21, and so getting out to the water park is always a fun experience for me.
When do they turn on the water out there?
They always shoot for Memorial weekend. They always try to open that weekend, but this area, the weather is always hit and miss, and so you have a lot of weather postponed or closed days, and the Wild Island always tells you to stick with their social media accounts because they'll let you know if the park's going to be open that day or not. But anyways, the slides will be turned on pretty soon, and maybe we can do an NSN team day out there. I still know some people around there, so that'd be fun.
Let's do it. Lazy River. I'm a Lazy River guy.
They have the bar in the middle.
Yeah, except that taco shell slide is always sketch. I always feel like I'm gonna jump over it.
I learned last year the Scorpion is one of the least popular rides because I think a lot of people are kind of scared of it.
It's scary.
And I growing up, I was actually scared of a lot of the rides there and the bigger towers, but now I'm obviously all about it. Black Widow, top of the list for me.
All right, Chris is going to Cancun. I've always been a Cancun kid. Been there a bunch.
Oh wow.
Club Coco Bongo, the Corona Bar. I'm a Cancun guy.
We have to turn it on you though. What are you looking forward to?
For me,
should we tell the people that you are engaged?
I'm engaged, but I'm not getting married this summer.
Not this summer, okay.
Still planning, but that's summer 25.
Okay. Wedding in Cancun, I hear.
Hey.
Can't see. I mean, kicking around the idea of destination wedding, but it's more than likely going to be in Tahoe, but still planning. But as far as what I'm excited about, like you said, I mean, the events are great. The rodeo is the one thing on the media schedule which has booze in the in the room, you know. So it's like
We
it's,
just love free food and free booze in the media.
No, I think the
moral of
ACC
it.
has free beers at the end.
That's
Like,
true.
Yeah.
We did have a. Yeah.
Toward
Oh,
the end of the
that's fair,
days,
we
they got
do,
some
yeah.
Coronas and
They
whatnot.
take really good care
Yeah.
of us
Yes.
there.
I always tell my fiance about the time Travis Kelce was standing next to me at ACC, and he's just like sitting there texting and like drinking a Truly, and she's like, "Oh, what was he like? What was he?" I was like, "He was just standing next to me. I was just on the computer and he was standing next to me." And she's like, all fascinated because she's a big Swiftie, and I'm
Okay.
like, yeah, okay. He was a cool guy, but he just stood next to me. Anyways, summer should be great. A lot of events, obviously, with Nevada Sportsnet. But yeah, we'll be back with you guys next week. And thanks so much for joining me, Mike and Chris,
was
or
fun.
should I say, Mr. Persona and Mr.
Mr.
Longball.
Charismatic.
Mr. Charismatic.
Come on.
I mean,
This all stems from our softball home run derby video, by
Yes.
the way. Which
Yes.
we should maybe let people in on that.
Plug it up.
Which you put together, and it's on our YouTube channel.
Yeah.
And we spent some time with the Wolfpack softball team, and they let us try to hit some dingers.
Yes.
I don't want to give it away, but there's a reason that we were calling Chris Mr. Longball. And so
Yes.
check that out on our
check it
YouTube
out. If you checked it
page.
out, you know by now. But yeah, I basically called Mike charismatic, and Chris didn't quite like that.
I got to be the
No,
MC.
No, I didn't like that. You basically said I wasn't charismatic and Mike was, so he'll be doing the intro. You can call Mike charismatic. I don't got a problem with that.
It's hard to get up on this energy.
There we go.
I'm a little out there.
He does have a lot of energy.
Yeah, I guess
A little out there.
I saved my charisma for the baseball bat, I guess.
Exactly. It translates
Chris's
the
charisma
volleyball.
comes via the keyboard.
Yeah.
I'm the guy that has to speak it. Yeah.
There you go.
Different strengths. Exactly. All right, guys. Remember to like, rate, subscribe wherever you guys get this podcast, and we'll be back next time.